Hello, so it's time to talk about the second half of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Part 5, Golden Wind. I did already talk about part 1, or the first section of this section of the story a couple weeks ago, so I will leave that video linked. I do recommend watching that one first because I tried to understand each of the characters and their position up to this point in the story. It was really more of a character-focused video, and this video should be more plot-centric. So I just finished watching these final episodes last night, so I don't have any notes, actually, which I usually try to get my thoughts together before I sit down, but today we're treating it more like a conversation. I have the episode list pulled up here so that I hopefully won't miss any major beats, but we're just gonna chat about how I felt about part 5. So this section of the story began with the duo that are able to capture someone's tongue and force them to say the opposite. It was such a unique stand battle. It was so between the shark that was jumping between pools of liquid and everybody being frustrated. Like, everyone's already kind of frustrated at the situation that they're in right now, at losing a previous crew member, at the disruption of their group's order, and then their youngest and least I guess you could say the least intelligent of the group, who took it really hard, who had a really hard time leaving Fugo behind, is now just acting out. Like, one could assume, there was a piece of me that as I was watching it, that I was like, y'all, he's obviously acting wrong. Like, you have spent all this time with him. Notice something's up. You live in a world where stands can do literally anything. Notice something is off. Please, I beg you. But at the same time, if you've just lost a crew member, everybody's nerves are kind of shot. Everybody is feeling a disruption in the group's order, and then the youngest kid is acting out. I kind of don't blame them for missing this one, but Giorno got it, and his quick thinking, his ability to persevere no matter what, like, he is such a tenacious character where he will just push himself to the absolute maximum to be able to take care of everyone. And we got to see a lot of sacrifice through this section. We got to see a lot of the crew members just doing anything to take care of each other, to protect each other, as well as just one of the funniest scenes in the entire part in this entire section. And that was when they're like, he might be a stand user. Totally normal looking guy. No pink hair, no crazy outfit, just a normal looking guy in a suit. And they're like, I have not detected the pattern yet. He must be a stand user. And then they just start beating him up one by one. Everyone's acting totally chill. And then they get up and start demolishing this guy. It's just like, it was so out of pocket. It was so funny. Next up, we have the airplane episodes. And again, I just really love the self-sacrifice that the crew has for one another when they realize what this stand is and how it got on board and how it responds to movement and all the mechanics around it. Giorno is sacrificing his arms. He's sacrificing, I mean, he's already lost one arm. He's ready to get rid of the other. Anything to get this away from everyone else. And Bruno is shouting, just give it to me then. Just let me have it. You're going to lose your stand. You're going to lose your ability to control your stand if you continue to take all of this on yourself. But because, again, Giorno is such a quick thinker, he's so smart. Honestly, I have heard many people say that Giorno is a much lower JoJo on a lot of people's list, which is unfortunate because while his personality isn't as standout as so many people, he's got to be one of the smartest JoJos we have. But it's his quick thinking that gets them out of most of their situations. And in this section, we also got to see Trish get her stand ability, which I really loved because it's basically turning anything to rubber or elasticizing anything, which makes it so that when she does use her stand, it is really creative. But also, I just think it was good for her character to actually develop her a little bit and to have a fight where everyone's still trying to defend her, still trying to protect her like always, but she is now 2 steps ahead of them. She's the one thinking, how am I going to execute this plan? How am I going to protect everyone? And being able to use her stand ability to manufacture a parachute and to get rid of the stand and to protect everyone else. And I thought it was a really good scene for her. It's unfortunate that her character really never does grow much of a personality or have much, she doesn't have a lot of scenes beyond this. Not to say none, because she does get her moments in the end as well. She's just not a very interesting character. Okay, then we have the whole section where we're introduced to Doppio properly. We get his backstory and we get introduced to how he functions in this world. Now, I loved this section of the story because I think that Doppio, the way the story played out, his character, where the way it was described is, I believe he has DID. So the way it was described is that some sort of traumatic event happened to him and his soul split, and now he basically has like the light side and the dark side. And Doppio is the primary person that we interact with, but Diavolo? Why can't I think of his name? Diavolo. Diavolo can take over and it'll change his physical shape, it'll change his voice, it'll change his eyes, like and the way we got introduced to this through the fortune teller and then through the fight with Risotto. And then with the fight with Risotto, it was so immersive that I forgot that we weren't even hanging out with our main crew anymore. I love the element of connecting the two by Doppio not realizing that the two are actually connected, and he thinks that he's communicating with his boss, but in this way where he hears a phone ringing and it's him creating the ringing noises, and he thinks he's picking up a phone to talk to his boss, but he's picking up a frog or an ice cream cone or a child's telephone on an airplane that the kid is playing imagination with, and he thinks he's talking to it. He thinks he's borrowing it to talk to his boss. The way Araki chose to depict this balance between Doppio and Diavolo was such an immersive, interesting way. And then to immediately introduce a character that I forgot to even mention, the whole dynamic in the first part of my review, where there's this group of people that are wanting to also take down Diavolo as well, King Crimson as well, and he chopped up one of their members, and so now they're going after him. So Risotto is going after him, and his standability has got to be one of the most disturbing ones yet, and I think I say that in almost every video, but the imagery of seeing a pair of scissors underneath someone's skin opening up and working its way out of the person, or needles puncturing out of their skin from within them. Nope. Don't want it. Don't like it. Don't want anything to do with it. One of my patrons posted this meme after I watched those episodes, which is just, like, it didn't even cross my mind, but that is Jojo's logic, and it makes me so happy. But it was one of my favorite fights of this season because of how interesting Doppio / Diavolo's standability. I mean, I love King Crimson. I love the way Jojo's deals with time manipulation, because it's not as simple as going forward or back in time. There's like strict rules around it that make it a lot more complicated, that make it so overpowered, and you just have to think. You have to think in such different ways to actually be able to combat it, but also pairing that with the very specific bent for revenge that Risotto has, and watching them have to figure out how to overpower each other, how to get around the other one's stand ability, and the whole time Diavolo telling Doppio, just hold on for a little bit longer. No, it's okay. Okay, we can see what's going to happen in the future. We can see what's coming next. Someone's leg is going to break off, so just keep pressing. And then, it just kept surprising you in what direction it would actually end up going in. And the way this series removes you from our core group, who I love our core group. The way it removes us from our core group introduces us to this entirely different conflict, which is just as fascinating on its own, but then ties that core group back into it. I really feel that the plot line of part 5 is on its face it seems very simple, but it ends up being a lot more complicated and tangled than you might expect on the surface. So this leads us to the saddest episodes in the season, or in this part. So first of all, the way Diavolo / Doppio have to regain the iron lost so that they have the strength to continue on by eating a frog while it's still living, tying up a child and taking his blood and like sewing his mouth closed. Like, it was very disturbing. But then on the other side of things, Abbacchio is trying to turn back time using, again, one of the best stand abilities of the part, trying to piece together who Diavolo is, what he looks like, trying to figure out how to find him. And if you watched my first video on this, you know that Abbacchio is my third favorite of our group. And just barely. He's almost number 2. He's basically tied with Bruno. I loved his backstory. I love his irritation. I love his design. Like, I love this character so much. And so to have him on his own, using his stand ability, and then there's these kids, and their ball is stuck. And instead of being irritated, instead of, snapping at them, chasing them off, throwing rocks at them as they're throwing rocks at the ball in the tree, he decides to walk over there and get the ball out for them. They run off. He smiles, and then he's just killed. Just so abruptly, so unexpectedly, it was so fast. And then this show forces me to watch him die and then to pull back and make me watch his stand crumble as well. And then I had to watch Narancia mourn. I had to watch him just lose himself, become completely undone at the sight of his friend lying there on the ground, as all the other characters are trying to keep it together and trying to just handle it in the only way that they know how and move forward. Narancia is sitting there, is on his knees screaming, "Don't leave him alone! We can't leave him here! We can't leave him alone!" Narancia's reaction to it all just making it that much more painful to sit through because it went on for so long and because it was so desperate. The voice acting in that scene was brilliant. I don't know the voice actor's name, but they gave their all. Hold on! This episode summary is telling me that the boss impersonated one of these young boys. Is that true? Was Abbacchio set up? Were these not actually just sweet little boys playing and Abbacchio chose to be kind, but one of the little boys was the boss? Surely not. That makes it so much worse. Anyway, then we have the afterlife scene where Abbacchio faces the person that died because of him previously, and he's putting all the little glass pieces together. He's being very meticulous about it. He's really taking his time, embracing the process of it to make sure that it's done right and not trying to skip over the actual work that it takes just to get the quickest results possible, just to get the easiest results possible. I thought that this scene was brilliant in the moment and even more brilliant on reflection after the story ended, because that, King Crimson, who they're facing against, that's his MO, is skipping over sections of the story to get him the results that he wants in the easiest way possible. And the fact that Abbacchio, despite his path changing drastically, despite him making terrible mistakes, that he still is working to go through the process and to do it right, that he hasn't lost the core of who he wants to be, and that the person who died because of him is the one that delivers that message to him, that tells him, no, you're doing all right. I think that you're getting closer and closer to who you once were. But then he wants to leave, and his friend tells him, well, that's the bus that you used to get here, and it doesn't go back out. Just probably one of the saddest but also most beautiful scenes in the story. Like, honestly, Abbacchio's death, it was such a angering and upsetting scene, but also the afterlife scene was so beautiful. Oh my goodness! I asked my patrons if that scene was a setup and if the boss was one of the little boys, and yes, it was! Yeah, you see him in the background and a couple of the boys remark that they hadn't seen him before. That makes it so much worse. I'm gonna skip over the mold episodes because this standability, for whatever reason, just didn't capture me like some of the others do, although I did really love the characters. Chocolate was his name, I think, I loved him as a character because he was just crazy. The over-the-top villains for JoJo's just works for me. Obviously, I'm a Dio stan. So him mixed with his companion, I really liked them as characters, but the mold ability, I don't know. I just don't have a lot to say about it. Okay, so this is where the story really gets wild. So Polnareff is still alive and still here, the resilient lad, but he's a turtle most of this section. I honestly feel bad for the guy. He's been dead for so long, and Araki finally brings him back to life. I mean, I'm joking. Narratively, I've thought that he was dead. Araki finally brings him back into the story, and then just turns him into a turtle for the majority of the time, and his stand is just wreaking havoc. But I loved this section with the, like, okay, where is Doppio actually hiding? Like, who is he hiding with as their souls have all been switched? And then we have Chariot Requiem's entrance into the story under the influence of the arrow. So this whole section from here forward was mass confusion as far as what is the arrow doing, why is the arrow dodging certain people that are unworthy, and what effects does it all have. Now, this was all established in part 4 that the arrow can give a person essentially like enhance their power to exactly what it needs to be at that moment. We watched it happen with Kira in part 4 with Bites the Dust, which was extremely convenient, but also such an interesting way of doing things. And in part 4, it felt like a great convenience. In part 5, now it just feels like something that's being built on. Like, this is just a part of the world. So it was so interesting to have that reintroduced, brought back in, and to see how it looks on Giorno, to see how it looks on the characters here and now. And Chariot Requiem, I really struggle with that word, his entrance into the story as everybody's passing out and as he's walking slowly with his new form. Oh, it was so good. The tension was so high as they're fighting each other over this arrow. And when Giorno finally gets it, okay, let me try to tell you what I think I know. So King Crimson's ability is essentially to skip the cause and just get to the effect. So he can see into the future, and then he can cut basically cut frames out of the film and then just paste it together. So all of the events that led up to the final action are just cut out of the film strip. And then we get from here to here, splice time, right? So they're seeing all of a sudden these characters are reacting to, oh, time's jumping. We're missing panels. We're missing sections of this story. So King Crimson is near, right? That's his ability. So Golden Wind Requiem. When Golden Wind gets the arrow underneath his skin going up him and he gets his transformation, which I love his new look. It's basically the opposite. It's basically the reverse. We're skipping the effect and just doing the cause. Or at least that's what happened to Diavolo at the end. But he's able to reset time back to the beginning, so he's able to undo all the damage that's been done. And then when he takes down King Crimson, he damns him to an eternity of cause with no effect. An eternity of you die over and over again in the streets, stabbed by some rando who thinks you're trying to steal his coat, on an operation table, not an operation table, an autopsy table, and being cut open slowly, being thrown in front of a car, over and over and over again. You're just experiencing death in a different way, but never to the point that it would kill you. And then it just around and around it goes forever, seemingly, or maybe just until Giorno finally dies, then then Diavolo can die too, right? Because the stand ability will deactivate. Am I wrong? Is there an end to it? Is it just forever? It's like Kira's death in part 4 was so thematically brilliant for his character, actually being dragged into hell by a collection of hands, never being able to be at peace, which is what he was fighting for, was just normalcy and peace and to be left alone. His ending was so thematically brilliant for what his character, the harm that his character was causing on the world. And the same for Diavolo, with how he used his stand, cheating fate by seeing into the future and working to change it any way that he can, skipping over what it takes to get to where you're going and just get to the end quickly. Being forced to then live out the cause over and over and over again, but never actually getting any sort of release, never getting to any sort of conclusion, thematically was such a brilliant way to, and that's what I'm loving about these sections so far, is that it's not just, you know, a bombastic, explosive end, which I am partial to, honestly. I still think that Dio's concluding 4 episodes in part 3 are some of the greatest season ending, arc ending episodes of any show I've ever watched ever. But choosing to find an ending that makes sense within the mechanics that the world has already established, and something that is so thematically gratifying for what the villain has chosen to be, is just like, oh, it makes my literary heart very happy. And then the story ended by rewinding time, which I thought, oh my goodness, it's like, first of all, I tend to like an ending that goes back to the beginning and recontextualizes everything so that you have to view the whole story a little bit differently. Like, I just think that that's a really cool tool. I tend to be partial to it, but to have a stand ability that can basically reset time, that can basically go back to the beginning, and all the havoc that's been caused, all the ways that the world is being destroyed, this stand ability can go back to the start. And then the story in the final episodes goes back to the start. Like, is that not awesome? Like, is that not an awesome storytelling choice? Well, I think it is. So we go back to the start of being introduced to this crew and this group of people setting out to start their plans that ended up going in very different directions than they thought it would. We get to go back to the characters that we lost, the characters that we've mourned. I didn't even talk about Naracha's death. Oh, I was so excited to talk about the arrow and all the chaos there that I completely forgot to mention that during the body swap, or rather soul swap episodes, that we lost Naracha. So we lost Abakio. That death was the one. That was the one that got me. But Naracha too, Giorno trying to heal him up and having his soul transfer back to his own body and realizing that it's empty. And then for both Abakio and Naracha, he covered them in flowers, and it was just such a respectful, like it was like trying to give them the last bit of honor in the end. But it just like we keep losing people, and of course we lost Bruno a while ago, but he's been able to animate his corpse to just try to push on. And we lose him in this section as well, officially, finally, you know, as his vision is fading and his hearing is fading, and he can only see the soul of a person, but that means that he can be deceived, and he can't lead this group anymore. It's this slow fade as he's trying to push and try to give them the last of what he has, to the point that he can't give them anything anymore. Like, he can't lead them anymore because he can't even see when his enemy is right in front of him anymore. And so finally he passes on officially, and you know, it's just like we lost half of our group. First Fugo not being willing to defect and go with everybody else, and then these 3 that lost their lives. And Fugo was right. He said it. He's like, you're gonna die. You're not gonna make it. And they died. I'm sorry. I'll cool it. So there were the final episodes. We go back to seeing the people that we lost. We go back to seeing the people that have either separated from us or that their lives have been lost in this chaos that we've been on and learn about the rolling stones. So, oh my goodness, this stand ability that can look into the future and see who's going to die and basically like prophesy it onto stone, and show, okay, this person is going to die. So we had, first it started off with the daughter who didn't want to face the death that she was destined for, and so she just took it into her own hands. And then we see it with Bruno as well. And oh my goodness, it's so satisfying. I mean, it's terrible. It's so satisfying to see his, stone image, his prophesied death, and you can see the wisp coming out of his mouth, so you can tell, like, oh, this is the death we watched. This is predicting his death. Like, you can put it together before it's right there in front of you. And how crazy is it that we watched a stone follow people around? Like, we watched a ball of stone chase after our group, even jumping up the stairs. And it was actually really effective. Like, it actually was like, get it away. And Mista, I haven't even mentioned him in this episode because I've been more plot focused than character focused. I adore his character. If you watched my first episode, you know he's my number one. He's my favorite character in this part. Him trying so hard to fight against fate. Right? Like, it's been prophesied, it's been said, and now the stone is trying to take Bruno out early, and Mista's like, no, I will resist this. Like, I will fight against fate as hard as I can. I will not allow this to happen. And because there's no prophecy for him, he knows he can survive, so he'll, go to such extreme lengths of terrible injury, which he gets throughout this entire section of the story, in order to protect his boss and give him a little bit more life, in order to fight against fate. And in extending Bruno's life, we also then led Narancia and Abbacchio to their death. Fate has been a topic in this story, a theme in this story, I think, pretty much from the beginning, but in part 5 is when it really came to the forefront and really was just like, here we are, this is what we're discussing. And, I don't know, I feel like I still need to think on this ending a little bit more because it's been under 12 hours since I watched these episodes, but processing it with you, it's the finality of it, the resistance against it, the going the long way, even though that is the more painful way, even though that is the way that will take a lot more out of you, but like choosing to stand by what you believe is right and pushing forward regardless, not taking those shortcuts, not trying to see into the future as Diavolo did, trying to see into the future, trying to see what's to come so that you can control fate, but maybe trying to accept that fate will come, but choosing to stand by what you believe and do everything you can with the time that you have alongside of it. I don't know, I think that there's a lot more there with what the conclusion was saying. And I feel like I need to rewatch the ending to get the full depths of it. And that Diavolo's whole thing was essentially trying to like force fate to his will. Whereas our group saw fate, understood what was to come for them, understood that they would face death going forward, but still facing fate head on, still moving forward and doing everything that they can in the time that they have, pushing for what they believed was right, regardless of what kind of outcome that might bring to them. And we saw Mista try to push against fate, try to manipulate it to his will, try to force it to change. And we see that in Diavolo as well, how he tried to manipulate the outcome of things, ended up putting him into the position that he was in at the end of the story, which is essentially to pay for his crimes against the order of things, against fate. But I think that these characters were the perfect foil to each other. They were they were the perfect opposition to one another in philosophy, in standability, in what they were trying to get out of life and do with life. And going back to the beginning and making fate at the forefront of it and showing how that actually interacted with the story behind the scenes that we didn't even see, I thought was it was a much more subtle and quiet ending than what I'm used to with my JoJo's endings. But I loved it. I loved the change. It's not my most memorable or my most exciting or my most hype ending of a part, but I thought that it had its own kind of beauty to it that I really appreciated in its own right. I don't know, I have to think about it more, I have to talk on it more, so please do chat with me more about it in the comments. Part 5 is probably lower on my list of parts. Let's see, I've done 5 parts. I would still put part 3 as my number 1. I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I can't change who I am. And part 4 is my number 2. And then I would probably put 1, 2, and 5 very evenly. Like, they're very close to each other. Every JoJo part is a 9 or a 10 out of 10. Like, every JoJo part is phenomenal. This is one of my all-time favorite shows. This is one of my all-time favorite stories. Even the parts that aren't one of my favorite parts, like, they're still just so brilliant and chaotic and ridiculous and hilarious. And I do think that with each JoJo part, Araki is getting better and better at having the chaos and having all the things that I love about JoJo's, but kind of smoothing it out so it's a more cohesive and polished story. I don't know, I love this series. I would love to chat with you about it more in the comments. I would love to hear your interpretation of the things that I talked about today, of things that I skipped over maybe. I know there's a ton to talk about in this story. Apparently part 6 is well loved, I've been told, so I hope I love it. I'm always nervous going into a new part because they're all just so drastically different, you know? So I'm just like, I hope I like it. Anyway, please do chat with me more in the comments. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.